Hey tubers, many of you know I bought this 1985 Astro. It's a 250SX with the Astro front end on it. And what I want to do is it's kind of in the way, and I'm trying to figure out, is the motor any good? What kind of trouble do I have with the spark and everything else? I really have to do a little bit more analysis on it, because given that it's in the way, it needs to move, and I'm trying to figure out if I want to move it far away or keep it close. So given that the starter slips right, I can't tell if the engine's any good. I'm told it has a spark problem. So let's just spend a few minutes with it and do a quick assessment and figure out if this thing needs to go into kind of deep storage or if it's okay to leave here and fix right here. So I popped off the seat and I could see Musty One sent one of his furry friends down to visit with me. I really hate mice. Sometimes when you work on this stuff, you find good surprises, sometimes not so good surprises. Obviously, the valve has been broken off of this. I guess the mice were using it for bedding material because I found it in the air cleaner. You can see the stuff in there. Yeah, I don't quite know what transpired here, but that's surprise number one. I knew this when I bought it, that it had a China carb on it. You could tell the difference between China carbs and the Kevin that should be on this, because this is flat. It's not raised like this. This goes flat across. You don't have this dome. Boy, finding a whole heap of surprises here. First of all, red means ground. Right, this red wire goes to ground. So pay attention to when you're working on these things. So there's positive, there's red. I'm trying to put a charge on it. I think it's stone cold dead, so I think that battery is yesterday's news. So the surprise was the red wire. The second thing is, I thought this wiring harness would be all butchered up, but it does look like it has the proper CDI on it, the proper connectors, right? It really doesn't look, the wiring harness, other than whatever they were doing up here, really doesn't look too torn up. So that's good news. What we're going to do is we're going to do some, I'm going to call it static troubleshooting. For a CDI to work, you expect certain things, right? You expect when you go from ground to the pulse generator that you're going to see somewhere between 35 and 150 ohms. If you don't see that, you know right up front you've got a problem. You also want to go from ground to the input on this guy, which is the black and yellow wire, and you should see something close to a short circuit, somewhere around a half an ohm. Anyway, in a matter of just a couple of minutes, you just take the CDI out of here, take a look at the color of your wires, make a few measurements, and you could really figure out completely what's wrong with your electrical system, whether it's an open ground or what the story is. Here is the CDI, and those people, and then we're going to attempt to pronounce that, make the OEM CDI. Is it the right CDI for this bike? I have no clue, right? A lot of times people switch and swap, and whenever you get something that's, you know, not running, not sparking, that's in this kind of trouble, it's hard to be sure. So luckily, the test I can do of the wire harness and everything else, I could do whether or not this is the right one. Scheindingen, something like that. I'm probably saying it somewhat with a German accent, and I'm saying it completely wrong. Anyway, let's do some probing of the wire harness and see what we come up with. So we took our digital voltmeter and hooked the black wire to ground, and then with this we probed all those 6 conductors, and this is obviously the female end of the CDI connector. It's where you plug the CDI into. So it took a few minutes, and I drew the back of the connector, and the first thing I found was this black and yellow, which should go to the primary of the spark. It came in as an open circuit. So I unplugged the wires from the spark coil and checked it, and the ground had continuity on it, which means it was a short circuit. And the yellow wire to the yellow wire had continuity on it, a short circuit. And I plugged them back in, and it came in at a 1/2 ohm. So that might have been an issue. Black and red stator, that came in about 307. The black and white, when this is turned off, it's a short, and when it's turned on, it's an open. It's turned on, it's an open, which is good. Green to ground, 0 ohms, about what's expected. There was another wire in here, and I actually had to go and look it up. It's the green with the red stripe. That turns out it's a neutral switch. What this thing does is it needs to be in neutral to spark. And you might say, well, if it's not neutral, your starter won't work, but your Kickstarter will. So they don't want you starting this up unless it's in neutral. So, and when it's in neutral, this gets grounded. I'm seeing 130 ohms. I'm not quite sure if that's close enough to ground. Probably, you know, I'll mess with a little bit if I don't have spark. I'll go take another look at that. The blue and yellow goes to the pulse generator, and I got 324 ohms. It's a little higher than I expect. It might be good enough. I happen to know these engines, and inside the cover, inside the stator cover, they actually have wires that plug together to take the pulse generator signal out from underneath that cover. And they didn't do a very good job with those wires, so they have a tendency to oxidize. They're in oil all the time, so that connection oxidizes. So that resistance is a little bit high, and that could be another problem area. I think what I'm going to do, now that I have continuity here, I'm going to plug the CDI back in, and I'm going to see if I can't turn this over with my drill. I'll get the plug out. I'll use my drill to turn it over, and I'd like to see if the spark comes back. It may or may not, and once again, it could also be this green and red that needs to be grounded also for the, you know, neutral circuit. So yeah, I might just give it a try. I still, once again, I could still have the possibility of having to go in to clean those connections on the pulse generator wiring. So how's that? There's only 3-4 problems with this whole wiring system. It's almost easier if they just tore it off and I put my portable CDI on it. Oh, and even after all that, could be they put the wrong CDI. So that's what makes these so hard to troubleshoot. So I have a tendency to skip a lot of parts, and I'm trying to get better at that. I took the cap off the end here. Right, that just goes on. I actually used that big washer to take it off. Once I did that, I figured out that this is a clockwise rotation engine, and so you can hear the engine turning over, and the breathing, so to speak, as the piston goes up and down. I didn't initially have spark. Turns out, remember I mentioned there was like an extra wire that went to the CDI, and I think you guys could see it down here. It's actually a light green with a red stripe. Turns out, I looked it up, it goes to the neutral switch, and this is where the wire goes into the engine for the neutral switch, and I just hooked it up to ground with that blue wire, and the spark came back. So it turns out this thing had a neutral switch issue, and one could spend a long time trying to figure that out. What the CDI wants, what that little black box there wants to function, is this light green and red wire to be grounded, and that's what happens when you put it into neutral. It grounds that wire, which allows the neutral light to come on, because one side of the neutral light's already hot, it's already at plus 12, so when you ground that, it grounds the wire, which gives you spark, and it grounds the other side of the light bulb, which turns the green light on that tells you you're in nice shape here. So at this point, I have spark. You can hear I'm turning it over, and it actually has compression, or it sounds like it does. I don't know. Do I want to try something really interesting? I should probably save it for a future video. And by something interesting, what I mean is squirt a little gas into the carburetor, turn it over with the drill, and see if we don't get some popping and starting and so forth. I don't think I mentioned it, but let me mention it now. One of the previous owners of this, not the last owner, the guy I bought it from, but the owner before that, I got a little note. He must have watched my channel, or somebody must have told him, hey, remember that Astro? He contacted me and said that he used to own this and he sold it. So I need to get back with him, or if he sees this video, if you could give me some information about the history. Where did you get it from? Did you put the Astro kit on it, or was it kicking around? I know you mentioned that it was running when you had it, and you sold it as a live all-terrain vehicle. The guy I bought it from, I got the idea he bought it as a dead all-terrain vehicle. Bought it out there in Pennsylvania somewhere. I don't know if you're the person he bought it from. No, he couldn't have bought it from you, because once again, he bought it dead, and if you sold it alive, there had to be somebody in the middle. So anyway, any information you have on this thing, I would find interesting, because it makes it much more interesting also to talk about, that where this came from and so forth. It doesn't look like it has a crazy number of miles on it. It doesn't look like worn out, beat up, trashed. So you know, I think it'll come back to life, and I think it'll be fun to ride and play with. About the Astro front end, I do have another set of forks. I'm going to have to sniff around a little bit for a tire. If he uses the same forks and tire as a Big Red, then it's easy. There's a couple of those floating around. So, yeah, I have 2 or 3 ATC250SXs, the 3-wheel version, the proper version of this, so to speak. So I'm not in a big hurry to have, instead of 3, to have 4. So my tendency would leave this Astro front end on it. Some of you guys wrote in talking about putting this Astro on a motorcycle. The fork length, the triple tube length, I don't think is that big a deal, but the angle could be a pretty big deal. And once you set that angle, depending on what the rest of your frame looks like, where that very neatly hooks to the motor mounts on this frame, it might be a different story. It might be more interesting with a motorcycle. But this front end on a motorcycle would just be a blast. You could get that back tire whipping all about and really do some really pretty cool donuts. So anyhow, I consider today an A+ success. I always love it when a bike takes that next step toward coming back to life. I want you all to keep your feet down, your heads up, and I want you all to get out and enjoy each and every day. Bye now.